The monument that we stand in front of is one which is regarded by many as one of the finest examples in Western Europe of a Neolithic or New Stone Age passage grave. But the passage grave part is simply a descriptive term, because what we have here is a monument where you have a burial chamber in which the cremated remains of the dead are placed. The chamber is accessed via a passageway, and then the entire structure is covered with a big mound of stone. And passage graves are certainly not unique to Ireland. In fact, you find them across Western Europe, from the south of Spain right up into Scandinavia. It just happens we have some of the best preserved examples, and that's especially true here in the Boyne Valley, because this is an area of outstanding ritual importance. In the immediate vicinity, there are no less than 40 separate passage graves. Now, 3 are enormous: the great tombs of Newgrange, Nath and Dowth. You can see how Newgrange sits on this hill. Dowth is on a hill about 2 kilometres east of here, and if you walk around the back of Newgrange looking towards the northwest, again on top of a hill, is the third and by far the largest of these great tombs, and that's the great tomb of Nath. And I can see that some of you have already visited Nath this afternoon. So they put the big ones where you can see them, on top of the hills, and then surrounding the 3 bigger sites there's roughly 37 smaller passage graves. A good example of one of those 37 is a little mound in the centre of the field below us. Doesn't look especially exciting, hasn't yet been excavated, and there are no plans to excavate that site, but we are fairly certain that within that mound there is a passageway, a burial chamber with cremated human remains, and then a big mound of stone. So it is essentially a miniature version of the great tomb of Newgrange. And what I think is most impressive, that's an average size European passage grave, to give you just an idea of how big the big tombs truly are. And the larger sites are often called megalithic monuments due to the use of megaliths, or huge stones. And some of these you can see here at the base of the monument. These are the curved stones, of which there are 97. And also inside the passage and chamber is also constructed of the same type of material. Very specific type of stone, which is a mixture of slate and sandstone known as grey wacky. The most recent research we have suggests that all these large grey wacky stones were sourced near Cloughahead. Today Cloughahead is a small fishing village roughly 20 kilometres off from this direction. We don't know much about the people who built Newgrange, but we know they lived in the Stone Age, so their tools were stone and bone and wood, no metal, more than likely no wheel, and almost certainly no horse was available to help with transportation, and we know they were farmers. And as such, a Stone Age farming community, these were among the first of the settled farmers in this area. So most of the country was still very heavily forested, and even getting from here to where they could find the big stones involved clearing pathways through the forestry. And then they either had to drag the stones overland back to the site, or more recently it has been suggested they may have transported them by river and sea. But imagine the size of craft necessary to transport even one stone. Thousands of them were brought here to build Newgrange and Nath and Dowth. The mound itself, although I know the grass on top is a little bit confusing, it's an entirely artificial stone mound, and most of the stones within the mound were carried up here from the River Boyne. That's the river you can see flowing through the fields below us, the river that you crossed over today to get from the visitor centre to the bus stop. But there's a lot of stone used at Newgrange which is not local. The white stones, which run across the front third of the site, are quartz, and more specifically we believe they're Wicklow quartz, so taken from the Wicklow Mountains. And the Wicklow Mountains are about 70 kilometres south of here, because of course they're south of the city of Dublin. And then the stones that are peeking through the quartz, the oval or egg-shaped stones. Now even the shape of that stone is obviously highly symbolic, especially at this time of the year. But these egg-shaped boulders were most likely picked up along the northern beaches of Dundalk Bay. And Dundalk Bay is a good 60 kilometres north of here. To us those distances mean little, but you must always think in terms of the context of construction. Neolithic farming communities, most of the countryside forested, no horse, no wheel, no metal tools. To get the quartz and granite here, it was unlikely that they could have gone overland. So you're back to the use of the river and the sea. Something like this represented a massive investment of resources, time, effort, probably loss of life. And so far we've only dealt with assembling the stone. We haven't even entered into construction. And I do appreciate that looking at the outside of Newgrange today, this looks suspiciously modern. Now it is a reconstruction of the original wall, which probably only survived for a few centuries. Because with the weight of the material within the mound constantly pressing outwards, that facade would have been toppled forward within a few centuries of completion, and that may even have been the intention, because as the walls toppled over, the entrance area was covered over, and then Newgrange was abandoned. And for most of its history, it sat on the top of the hill, looking for all the world like a bigger version of the little passageway. So just a big, overgrown, neglected site. However, it was protected by myth and superstition and legend, all of which proved so powerful that there was no interference. Newgrange lay undisturbed until the end of the 17th century. Now, with the Battle of the Boyne in 1690, obviously land ownership began to change in this area, so lots of new landowners introduced weren't Irish, didn't know about, didn't care about legend and story, but they needed stone for construction. When they found a mound consisting of stone, you can guess what happened next. And quarrying was ordered to begin on this site in 1699. And we're very thankful when the workers arrived and they began digging, this is where they started to do so. So one of the first things they came across was that beautifully carved stone sitting right in front of the doorway. They happened upon the entrance stone. Finding that, they found the entrance, and the rest, as they say, is history. Newgrange has been open to the public since 1699. Now, it's been open, hasn't always been protected like it is today, and that's very evident when we get inside. Watch out for the graffiti. Lots and lots of names, pretty impressive dates that are scraped onto the stones of both the passage and the chamber within. It really gives us an idea of how vulnerable these ancient sites can be, because of course protection really only becomes possible with knowledge, and the principal excavation of this site was between 1962 and 1975, so quite recent in the grand scheme of things. Following on from that excavation, it was decided to rebuild this front wall, and this is quite close to how Professor O'Kelly, who led the excavation, quite close to how he suggests that Newgrange may have looked originally. But there's one very obvious alteration: the stairs. There wasn't an easy way into a Neolithic passage grave, because the suggestion is originally walls extending to either side of the entrance stone meant the only way inside was over that beautifully carved stone. So the stone was a physical barrier, and whilst that may have been practical in the Stone Age when probably very few people were permitted inside, a little less practical today. So to protect this beautiful entrance stone and to facilitate access, they cut away a section either side of the door, introduced the stairs, and then brought in this darker square cut stone simply to highlight that the area has been altered. The rest of the stones are the original material. Another very important finding of O'Kelly's excavation was the proposed construction date for this site, which is estimated at 3200 BC. Now that means Newgrange is in excess of 5,000 years old, approximately 500 years older than the Great Pyramids at Giza, and over 1,000 years older than Stonehenge, which is in Wiltshire in England. I'm not saying ours is better just because it's older, but I appreciate that 5,000 years at this time on a Saturday afternoon tends to roll off the tongue very easily. It's a bit more difficult to get a handle on just what that represents, hence the use of slightly more familiar ancient sites. And of course, what I think is most important, don't think of Newgrange sitting here in splendid isolation. It's not the only passage grave, it's part of the ritual landscape of the Boyne Valley, and it's that landscape that's the World Heritage Site. So looking at the entrance stone, I'm sure none of you are being introduced to the symbols upon it for the first time. They're found in many forms of art throughout history around the world. Doesn't make their interpretation any easier. They are abstract symbols, abstract in their very nature. So their meaning is not immediately apparent. Hundreds of theories and suggestions have been made as to the possible significance for the designs, but you'll be relieved to hear I'm not going to start delving into hundreds of theories. Realistically, no one can tell us what the symbols represent, and I would prefer that you contemplate the art for yourself. Maybe come up with your own theory. I can't tell you that it's right, and equally I can't tell you that it's wrong, so your theory is as valid as anything I could offer you. But the one thing I ask you to keep in mind in relation to all of the artwork, it's Neolithic carving, and the only tools available to the artists who carved them were tools of stone and bone and wood. So imagine a small piece of flint or similar type of stone that you could use as a chisel, and some sort of stone or wooden hammer. Now looking above the door, you'll notice another decorated stone up there. Between that stone and the lintel of the door is a small window-like opening. Now if you recall, the door was found in 1699, but the opening above the door was only found in the excavation, so in the 1960s. It has become known as the roof box, and the roof box becomes very important around midwinter solstice. You're probably aware December 21st is very special at this site, but of course the common misconception is that it's only the 21st, but in fact it's a week around that date. So imagine between December 18th and 23rd at dawn, so just before 9 in the morning. The sun rising in the southeast is coming above the horizon, immediately opposite the entrance to the tomb. For a few minutes, weather permitting, sunlight can travel along the passage to reach into the chamber. Now, it's not sunlight entering that's important, because that does happen at ancient monuments around the world. How it enters Newgrange, though, is rather special, because it's not going in through the big door, as one might expect, but only through the little opening at the bottom, only through this roof box that sunlight can reach the chamber. So I will speak more about that when we get inside. I'll be mentioning the roof box again, so just remember what I'm talking about. The opening above the heads at the beginning of the passageway. The group ahead of us will be emerging shortly, so I have a few little bits of housekeeping to attend to at this stage, particularly important for those who haven't been to Newgrange before. I've already mentioned how the chamber is not big enough to accommodate our group as one, but we also need to be mindful that the passageway approaching the chamber is both low and narrow in places, so be careful. Please mind your heads going in, and more importantly coming back out. These stones do not move, and you really don't want to learn that lesson the hard way. Careful with the heads. As it gets narrow, unfortunately it also gets very beautifully carved, and these carvings are really quite fragile. Every visitor has the potential to cause significant damage at a site of this antiquity, so we do need to be careful of that. Be careful of rubbing up against the stones. Resist the temptation to touch any of the stones, and if you have any cameras or rucksacks or camera equipment, bags, snakes, no matter how small you think they are, please take them off your person and hold them down in front of you as low as possible. The passage is at its widest from the knee down. Bags, cameras, etc. below that area, much less likely to scrape and scratch the stones. I've mentioned low, I've mentioned narrow. If you are in any way claustrophobic, let's face it, if you're anxious about entering small, enclosed, ancient passage graves, then wait until the end of the line going in. There is only one passageway and there are no emergency exits. If there's any reason that you may need to leave in a bit of a hurry, just remember that the last one in is the first one back out again. And finally, but most importantly, it is a very sacred place, far more so I think than we can properly appreciate today. So out of respect, we do not allow filming or photography of any sort, with or without a flash, once we go inside. Outside certainly, but no filming, no photography, no camera phones, nothing whatsoever once you go in through the doorway. This is one of the few rules we have at Newgrange, but I ask you please to respect it, and more importantly to respect this very ancient site. Now we have, as I said, two different coloured stickers for this group. This is the last tour for today, so whichever group you're in, if you want to have a look around the site, you need to make sure that you do so, because this is the last group that will be heading back to the visitor centre, so your time is limited enough from that point of view. Those of you who have orange 345 stickers, this is your opportunity to look around outside. The pathway leads all the way around the monument. Be back at the entrance in about 10 minutes, and that will be your chance to go in then. Those of you with red 345 stickers, you'll be coming inside with me now, but make sure that my colleagues can see your stickers as you approach the doorway. Okay?
We're going to go.